All right, so we're back. We're doing another comic book interview, and I have the pleasure of talking to Jesse Baer here. He is from Calvin and Comics, and he's the creator of Burlap. Jesse.
How's it going? Yep, that's me, Jesse James Baer. I'm the writer and creator of Burlap from Covenant Comics. Thank you so much for bringing me on. I actually watched the interview you did with JD a while back.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
I was very excited that you you reached out and wanted to talk to me as well. So very cool.
Good. This will be great, man. I really like the comics so far. I'm on issue 3 of 4. I read issue 3 this morning. Is there more than that, or is there just the 4?
Yeah, there's the fourth one, which I believe is in the email I sent you, issue 4. And then after that, there's the 90s Nightmare Trilogy, which is kind of like a Burlap Year Zero. That's parts 1 through 3.
Oh, cool.
Yep, so we got about 8 books under our belt with the Burlap series right now.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll have to check them all out. I only thought there was 4, so this is great.
8, including the one we just kickstarted, Postmortem, which is the direct. Yeah, that's the direct sequel to issue 4. So once that's printed and out, that'll be our 8th book in the series so far.
Awesome. Now, how did you get into comics? Like, what are the origins of you grew up reading comics?
Oh yeah. So when I was a kid, I watched all the superhero movies, everything that was big back then in the 90s, like the Michael Keaton Batmans, the Christopher Reeve Supermans. And I just, grew up loving superheroes in that genre. But I didn't really get into comics until 2000. I was in a grocery store with my mom. I was 10 years old. And I always loved to go and look at the magazines and the books while my mom did her 2 hours of shopping. So I was perusing through the magazines and I came across Ultimate Spider-Man Volume 1, which had just released that year by Brian Michael Bendis. And I can't really remember the rest of the creative team on there. His name sticks out the most because he's very much associated with the Ultimate brand. And my mom let me get it, and I read it cover to cover, like as soon as I got home, and I was just hooked. And after that, I just started collecting, like every time Ultimate Spider-Man came out with a volume, I'd order it from Amazon. And that got me into more books. Like I started getting into the Punisher Max series and stuff like that, just mainly graphic novels. Not so much like the monthly issues. I would just wait till it was all there. And then I'd get the trade paperbacks and I'd spend hours in the comic book shop just piling up, even stuff outside DC and Marvel, like Dark Horse. I was really into The Goon and Cal McDonald and all those kind of like more dark horror themed comics I started getting really into. But yeah, that's really it all goes back to Ultimate Spider-Man Volume 1 is where I really got my start reading comics.
Cool. No, I can definitely see those like horror elements in this comic. It's a nice blend of like superhero and horror. Like it's a nice mix where it doesn't feel like it leans too much to one side. You know what I mean? Like once you think, okay, this is a horror comic, it goes back to like the superhero, supernatural element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a big goal for me with the Burlap books, because I guess I grew up reading comics, but I also was that kid in like 6th grade who during read aloud I'd bring in like Stephen King, and the teachers were like, okay, now let's have somebody bring up Magic Treehouse. What's this kid doing? Yeah. So I always loved horror. Horror always kind of like came first, like the Universal monster movies and stuff like that. And then into the slashers of the 70s and 80s. So my goal with Burlap was to take my passion for the gritty horror and noir stuff that I absolutely loved with all the vigilante kind of comic book stuff that I loved. So that's kind of where that whole, almost like I call it like the slasher vigilante kind of genre kind of was born from when it comes to Burlap.
So, for the people that don't know, give like a little brief description of like who Burlap is.
Okay. So basically the best way to describe him, the one best way is the way that I've always described him since I created him. The other way was somebody, I don't even remember who, but they wrote it as like a comment on one of the Kickstarters. But his comment was, they called it the Michael Myers of Justice, which I thought was really cool. And that really does fit the bill. And to me, I always explained it as if you take, the crime fighting, revenge fueled actions of like the Punisher and Batman, and you intercut that with the brutality and silent nature of characters like Jason and Michael and Leatherface. That's really who Burlap is in a general sense. In a specific sense, he was, a young kid who watched his mother brutally murdered in front of him, which, is kind of like part of like the formula for the vigilante, but it goes a different direction where instead of becoming a, justice seeking vigilante superhero, he becomes something of a mass murderer of bad people. So there's also like a little bit of like Dexter there, if I'm looking at comparisons where
totally,
where Dexter is a serial killer who hunts serial killers, Burlap is a slasher killer who goes after anyone even remotely evil, in a sense.
It's funny you said that, because I'm a huge fan of Dexter, and I kind of was thinking the same thing. Like, it's like kind of the similar. That's probably the closest comparison. Like, if if say Burlap was a show, I feel like it would be compared right next to Dexter in a way like that.
Oh yeah, yeah, that whole theme of like the killer who kills killers kind of aspect.
Oh yeah. Now, are you like a fan of Dexter? Have you watched the whole thing?
Oh, I just finished watching the new episode that came out yesterday morning.
Yeah,
and I am loving it.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah.
So thrilled that it's back, because I'm sure as a fan like me, you were very disappointed by the original ending.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is when COVID hit, that's when I really was like, oh, I always wanted to get into Dexter. I've always heard good things. I'm going to binge it. So me and my brother binged the whole thing. And when we were in that last season, like, I think we just started episode 1 of the last season, it was announced that it's coming back. So it was like kind of like nice.
Oh, yeah.
Like, all right, however this ends, we're getting more. So
yeah, you had that.
So
see, we didn't have that back in the day. We were watching it every week. We were just like, oh. And then they created that great meme about Breaking Bad where they're like, be sad that it's over. Be happy it didn't end like Dexter.
No, but so what kind of comics are you getting right now? Are you said you're still reading comics, or?
Oh, yeah. The majority of my comics right now are all indie Kickstarter comics. Like I'm considered a super backer on Kickstarter, because like when I first got on Kickstarter, I had no idea what I was doing. I still only partially know what I'm doing. I'm still kind of figuring out all the mechanics. But yeah, I just discovering that and discovering all the great indie comics that are out there that are created by, guys just like me who are just wanting to tell great stories. They're kind of out on their own. But of course their support systems, they're either their publishers, their teams. And I get like a new book almost like every week just from those, because I'm constantly like, and I also believe in like, supporting those who support you. So any creators that have supported any of my books, I make sure as often as I can, I support their books as well. So I've been reading a lot of indie comics, and they're fantastic. Like stuff like there's Phil Falco, who's out there in the indie verse. He writes the Haunting books. They're fantastic. Mitchell Underwood does Wraith, which is amazing. He's hard at work on new stuff for that as we speak, I believe. And then there's my team from the Savage Sandbox. Each of those guys are individual publishers in and of themselves. They're cranking out stuff every month. And yes, that's as far as comics. That's my main reading right now. I kind of fell off with DC and Marvel, not because of any reason other than I just don't get out to the comic shops that often anymore. With COVID, I lost track. I did really good for a long time. Like when Grant Morrison was doing his Batman run years ago, I was on top of it. I was on top of the New 52, Final Crisis, and then the New 52 I followed very closely when it first started. And I was reading all those titles and the Punisher and all that. But like the most recent thing I read was like the first 2 issues of the 3 Jokers. And aside from that, like I really kind of lost touch with the mainstream stuff. But I'll look into getting back into it.
The great thing about comics is like you can always kind of, I don't know if you could hear that. It's like I still have this home phone downstairs that rings. Can you hear that?
It was like, wait, is that a home phone?
Yeah, no, my dad works for AT&T, so of course we have a phone still in the house. But yeah, he was one of the. But yeah, I feel like the single issue comics. It's kind of, we're in a time where like it's great because like indie comic creators and like, the smaller companies like Dark Horse, Image, and even just the Instagram, self-publishing community, it's huge. People love,
Yeah.
supporting other creators. And like you said, like, because I made a comic, you know, um, in 2019, like starting in June with
Oh,
two of my
nice.
friends. And, we had an Indiegogo campaign. It was fully backed. And then it
Nice.
led to other projects and stuff. And,
Mhm.
that was kind of my first steps into this community. And it's great. Like it was just kind of like, you don't need DC, you don't need Marvel. Like as
Right.
much as I love DC and I mean Marvel MCU, it's huge. Like
Yeah.
there's so much more to that. Like you see, like I don't know if you watched Invincible or The Boys, but
Oh
like
yeah. I love all that.
like seeing stuff like that, like anything based on a comic for me, like even if it's something I never read, it like kind of makes
Hmm.
me happy because it's like, oh,
Oh yeah.
like it's not just superheroes. It can be fantasy. It can be, it can be like a satire on superheroes. Like
Oh yeah.
it's there's so much you can do. I mean,
Hmm.
and you mentioned Grant Morrison Batman. I actually have the omnibus,
Oh yeah. There it is.
but yeah, that's like my favorite Batman.
Such a
I
great
love.
run.
Yeah, it was a nice like blend of like modern and kind of basically saying, oh, everything that's ever happened in Batman's history's happened. Like it was kind of a
Hmm.
cool modernization of some Silver Age concepts in
Yeah.
comics. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
but you know, um, with the modern DC stuff, it's kind of a lot of it's just rehashing the same ideas. Like
Yeah.
Batman. The Batman comics have been kind of slipping a little bit. Like I find myself kind of going back, or honestly, just kind of looking elsewhere, like the indie community.
Yeah.
That's why reading
Mhm.
Burlap was like a breath of fresh air for me because it was like,
Thank you.
wow, because I'm
Appreciate
not a
that.
horror guy at all, but I really enjoyed the concepts and the thing that was great was it's a black and white comic. You know what I mean? More often than not, a lot of those comics get overlooked, but this was definitely one of those ones where it can't be overlooked. It's great. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
What
I
was
really
like the
appreciate
decision for that? Like, why did you decide black and white, or was it
it.
the
So
artist's
originally,
decision?
yeah, originally it was a economic decision because the when I met the book's artist Zorin Jovicic, uh, he gave me his prices and he's like, okay, this is what I charge a page for black and white. This is what I charge a page for color. And I went black and white because that's all I could afford. But also like when I pictured long story short, Burlap originally wasn't a comic book. It was a film. And I actually studied film all throughout college. I worked on some independent projects during college and after college. I did my own web series that I produced, directed, starred in the whole nine. And so I wrote this script that would become Burlap. And the production just fell apart. It was super stressful. Like anything involving film production is extremely stressful.
Totally, yeah.
And especially like when I was making films when I was younger, like, I was a kid and now I'm, a husband and a father, I have a job. So finding time to do like, 9 to 10 hour shooting days near impossible. And so when the film fell apart, I was at I was at Cherry Hill, New Jersey at a horror movie convention called Monster Mania Con, which I'd gone to every year. And I met this comic book artist team there, the Corpse Crew, who make the Living Corpse comic. And I
Okay.
spoke mostly with Buzz Hassan, who was one of the original creators and artists on the book. And me and him were just talking like, the movie and comics and art. And I showed him like, this really cool like poster I had made up for the movie. And he's like, oh, if you want any concept art done or anything, I'm available. I said, cool. So he did the first, and I described like how Burlap looked, how I wanted the mask to look and all that. And he drew the first illustration of Drayton, aka Burlap. And he sent it to me. Like I still have the original upstairs. And it just blew me away. And that in that moment, I'm like, okay, the movie isn't working out. I could do this as a comic book. Like, I have a small budget. And instead of putting that money towards, hiring actors and doing all the effects and stuff, I can put it towards a comic artist to draw my script. And so once I met the artist and saw what he could do and how amazing his art was, black and white, being an economic decision, but also as I started seeing pages, I'm like, oh, this is the look. Like, this is that gritty noir kind of Sin City, Walking Dead type style that I kind of always felt the movie would look good in, and the book itself. Now I think the black and white looks great.
Yeah, totally. And it's so heavily detailed. Like, I see a lot of comics that are black and white, but it's very like simple. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that it's fine, but like I feel like the really heavily rendered artwork looks the best in black and white.
Oh yeah.
It's got to be a balance. And no, I think it looks great. I mean, every like the blacks are really harsh. Like, I don't know, you have all the essential information, and the mask is awesome. Like, it's just an iconic looking mask, and just his whole suit. And like you said before, I like how he doesn't talk, he doesn't say anything. That's
Hmm.
great. But so would you say like when you got that first bit of artwork, that's when you were like, this could be a comic, like in that moment, or is it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I enjoyed like I commissioned a poster for the movie originally from a fantastic artist, and just working with that artist, and just like him sending me the rough sketches and then the pencils, the inks, the colors. I just loved that collaboration. And then when I got the official concept art from Buzz, that I was just sold. Like in my head, I'm like, this is because writing has always been my biggest passion. Like, I studied film and all that because I wanted to write movies. Back when I was a kid, I did the whole like Captain Underpants thing where me and my friends would stay in a recess and draw and write our own comics.
Yeah.
And I always loved writing. Like that was always like my goal was to be a writer. And so once I saw that image, that's what in my head, I was like, okay, I can write this as a comic book. And translating a film script into a comic book was actually super easy. I was worried it was going to be difficult learning the format and all that, but the way I write for film is, I picture each scene in my head, and it's almost like, how we do storyboards and stuff like that for films, and just contributing that to panels instead of shots on the screen was because I already had like, this is a wide shot, this is a medium shot. Now, okay, this is a wider panel, this is a smaller panel. So, and Zorin loves that because like my scripts are super detailed, almost too detailed. Where like I'll
Yeah.
have everything down to like, debris in the street during like an alley scene, or like the make and model of like a beat up old car like that's behind them or something like that. So that helps him a lot, he says, because he doesn't have to do a whole lot of imagining. Like it's all right there. Like he can see it in his head from what he reads.
No, that's another interesting point, because like I've worked with artists before, and some artists like the heavily detailed. Some of them like to be like, okay, let me kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. But I mean, yeah, some artists love that. You really paint the picture for them. They don't have to really put too much thought into it. It's more so, okay, I'm going to start drawing it.
Yeah. The
But
beautiful thing about working with Zorin though on the books is it's really a collaboration, because I do put all that out there for him, all the details in the script, but he also will contribute things where he's worked in comics for years and years and years. He has so much experience, and he'll be like, oh, this looks really cool. What you wrote is really cool, but what if we did it this way? Like, what if like visually it would be a lot cooler to see it like in this fashion? And he's always right. It always looks amazing. And so it's really a creative collaboration between the two of us, where like even what he has the most fun with is the kills. He always enjoys when he reads a good kill in the book, and then he'll like this isn't really a spoiler. I'll just keep names out of it. But in issue 2, there's a certain character who goes into a basement, and he does not. He comes out of the basement, but not the way he wants to. So originally, that was a very simple, just like neck snap, just like a very like traditional like Jason Voorhees, like done. But Zoran, he's gonna hear me say Zoran. He's gonna be like Jesse. He wrote to me and he's like, hey, that's really cool and all, but what if he crushes his skull through his eye sockets? Wouldn't that be better? And I was like, do it. Perfect.
yeah.
And so we really have a lot of fun with that, where we come up with all different kinds of fun ways to dispatch bad guys and whatnot. But yeah, it's definitely a partnership. It's definitely a collaboration where Burlap wouldn't be what it is today, almost 8 issues in, and 3 very successful Kickstarters without Zoran's art and his contributions creatively. So I owe a lot. I owe the whole thing to him, really, because he he's been like my mentor through, making comics. And
Yeah.
yeah, definitely, like, in my opinion, one of the best. So
That's awesome. So where did you go to college? I don't know if you mentioned that.
I did Temple Film School for a little bit, and but my main degree is in fine arts and cinematic production from Bucks County Community College. After
Okay,
there, I
cool.
a stint at Temple in the film department as well.
What kind of films would you say, like, what are your top 5 films in terms of like inspiration? Like, you could rewatch over and over again. Like,
Okay, yeah. So obviously, John Carpenter's original Halloween has always been a big inspiration for me. I just, it's one of those movies that I grew up watching that created my love for horror and all that. And then this is totally random one, I feel like, but Back to the Future is a big inspiration for me, like creatively, just because it's such a fun story. And I think it was like ahead of its time. I feel like it just has everything, Back to the Future, like all 3 parts. And not all 3 parts are perfect, some of them have some stuff. But I just feel like the narrative and the characters and stuff like that, I just feel like it's just such great storytelling, such great character creation, not so much development. Like, the characters do develop over the movie, but, it's just fun characters. It's a fun story. That was like one of my favorite movies growing up. And like narratively, it's a very big inspiration. And then I'd have to say, of course, like it's very general, but almost anything by Tim Burton. I just stylistically, I love Tim Burton's style, like Edward Scissorhands, Sleepy Hollow, Beetlejuice, all that stuff. The Batman movies, of course. I just always took inspiration from them as far as like, that kind of like a balance between dark humor and like gritty, like, kind of scary, creepy aesthetic. And that's something else I really tried to incorporate into Burlap, where some parts are very dark and some parts very disturbing and horrific, but then there's a lot of moments of dark comedy that I try and put in there to try and balance. And most of that comes from Jack. Within the first like issue or 2, he's really the source of the comedic relief. And he is actually based on a real person, which is why it's so much fun to write him and easy, because I can just hear my buddy's voice in my head when I'm writing, and I'm like, yep, he would say that. Yep.
Yeah. So. Oh, that's cool. Awesome. So, obviously, there's not just you and Covenant, there's, JD, and then there's the other Jesse. So how did you get involved with these guys? Like, because it's really the 3 of you guys, that's like the trinity of Covenant Comics.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I wrote Burlap issue 1, and that was in like early 2019, and I hired Zorin to do the art. We wrapped it up in about 2 months, the whole thing, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I wanted to do it. I wanted to see it. I wanted to hold it. And so I ordered about 50 copies of it from a printer of Morris Publishing, that they printed the first books. And so then Zoran kind of pushed me, because I was just going to sell them on Etsy. I think the Etsy store is still open. Thankfully, nobody's ordered from it in like a year or 2. But because, the comics are available now on the Covenant website. But yeah, I was just going to sell them myself and just kind of see where it went. But Zoran really pushed me to try and get a real deal publisher. So I sent out applications or submissions to over 50 some publishers, including some of the big ones. I sent it to Image, and Image, I'm shocked, they actually replied. It was a rejection, but they did reply. They wrote back to me and said, hey, this looks great, keep up the good work, but it doesn't really fit our catalog at the time. But thanks again. They're like, we know how ambitious it is to reach out to a publisher, and we wish you luck. And I'm like, oh, well, it's bittersweet, because, they said no, but I also just heard back from one of my favorite publishing houses. So I still have the email. I printed it. But yeah, so I either heard no's from everybody or silence. And some responses like the image one were kind, like, oh yeah, not really our thing, thanks though. And then some were like, no thanks, nope, not happening. And it was a little discouraging, but I'm like, I'm just gonna keep cranking, just keep sending it out. And I even like to, some of the smallest publishers, I thought, that still, I don't even really hear too much about. I sent it out to, heard nothing. And I came across a post on one of the Facebook indie comics groups from the Covenant Comics page. I'm like, oh, who are these guys? And at that point, they were doing the Crossbones issue 1 Kickstarter. So I went to their website and I'm like, oh, this is really cool. These guys, seem kind of like me. They're just kind of starting out with each of them have their own book. So I emailed them. I sent them the PDF of issue 1, kind of gave my whole pitch. And I think it was about 2 months later, I heard from JD directly. And he was like, hey, I read it. I love it. Let's talk. So we got to know each other over a few weeks. Like he said, hey, before we get into any, deciding if you're going to join, he's like, this is a really close group. It's me and my best friend from high school. We started this company together. So, we want to make sure we're, getting into, that you can be a good part of the team and that we all get along. So I just kind of chatted with them back and forth through email and Instagram and all that for a little while. And then in November of 2019, actually it was just the 2-year anniversary of that. Me and JD did a horrible Instagram live about it.
I was on that live stream.
But yeah, we just ran out of stuff to talk about. But yeah, so yes, then in November I signed on with them. It's funny because through all these discussions I had with other publishers, a lot of things about contracts came up. And, everyone was telling me hey, if you're going to sign with somebody, make sure everything's written down and signed, so, nobody can steal your stuff. So I said to JD, I'm like, hey, so you guys have a contract for me to sign, joining. And he went, let me get back to you on that. And later they would tell me, they looked at each other like, a contract? What does he mean? What do we do? We don't know what he's talking about. So they researched it and they came up with a contract that, it worked out great for both of us. I would retain the rights to Burlap. They had the rights to distribute it and everything like that. So yeah, and now I consider JD and Jesse to be 2 of my closest friends, even though we've never met in person. We talk every week and we're constantly planning things and talking about the future. And they also really helped, push Burlap to where it is today, with, they've been so great with the crowdfunding and all that. They're always working. We all work together on all of our crowdfunding, whether it be Crossbones or Ether, Burlap. We give each other feedback on the pages. We, help promote and the whole nine. So it's really become a team effort, everything we get into. So yeah, it's been 2 years with them and it's great. I couldn't be happier that, I ended up with such a great team.
Yeah, it sounds like a good bunch of guys. It reminds me of my 2 buddies that I made my first comic with. Just a lot of camaraderie. It's a shame in this indie comic industry, there's a lot of it's
exactly
stripped away from. Yeah, it's kind of stripped away from the passion and the love. It's more just oh, pay me for this. I'll do this. It's just it's good to have a group of collaborators to talk and at the end of the day, even if you don't make a ton of money off it, it's you're building friendships, you're building connections. Your love of comics is being fueled, and I love hearing stories like that. So,
and that's one of my biggest takeaways from this whole endeavor is that I now have friends not only all over the United States, but even in other parts of the world where I never would have met them had I not gotten into the indie comics community, and I'm very thankful for those friendships. And even the teamwork and collaboration with those people. So that's before, I had my friends, here in Pennsylvania, people I still talk to from high school, but now I have people I call good friends, that I've never even met in person, but, we talk all the time. We collaborate through comics, our love of comics. So that to me has been the greatest reward from even starting the Burlap books, has been meeting all these amazing people and, creating all these relationships.
Yeah, that's great. I still I need to reach out to Jesse Chisholm because I want to talk to him because
He's a
when I
hermit.
yeah, no, that's what I
He's
definitely
gonna
gotta
watch
do
this
some.
and go, Jesse Baer, I'm not a hermit. I just live in the middle of nowhere. Talk to me.
No, but like the thing that's cool about Covenant is, all three of these characters have an iconic look. And what originally brought me into, following Covenant was I saw Ether and I was like, that's cool. And whenever there's like a redhead comic book character, I'm like, sign me up. Like I want to know what's going on with this character.
Yeah.
So, but so you must be a fan of like the MCU, DC, EU, all that.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on, those two big cinematic universes? Like,
So I'm I'm kind of like in like the black sheep territory of like the DCU fans because I
too, yeah.
love most of it.
Yeah.
I could sit down and watch, the Jared Leto Suicide Squad movie, no problem. Like, I really enjoy that movie. I think it's a lot of fun. Is there a lot wrong with it? Yes. Is there stuff like, that source material would cry if it saw what they did with some of his characters? Absolutely. But it's fun. Like, I just love it. Like, in general, like the DCU, I love all the Snyder stuff. There's stuff I don't agree with that was done, stuff that confused me of why they would do it to the characters. The biggest one that I couldn't forgive was the original release of Justice League.
Yeah.
I saw that in theaters by myself because my wife refused to see it. My wife's one of those people who, like, she is like an OG fan. Like, she won't watch Spider-Man movies that don't have Tobey Maguire. She won't watch movies that don't have Christian Bale because those are to her that character. Like, to her, there's no Ben Affleck Batman. There's just Christian Bale Batman. She doesn't care about Ben Affleck. She doesn't care about anything that comes after Bale because she loved those movies and that's her Batman, which is fine. But
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and so I went to Justice League. Like, I enjoyed Batman versus Superman. I didn't hate it. Again, there were things I disagreed with, but seeing those two on screen for the first time is still awesome to me. That's one of the coolest cinematic moments is that these two were, like, after years and years, that's all us DC fans wanted was to see, the big three on screen together, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and to see that universe grow. And especially after MCU pulled it off, it's like, okay, now let's see the other side. Like, let's see them pull it off. And obviously it had its issues, but with Justice League, I watched it in theaters and I was so excited to see all the characters together. And I was kind of like beer goggles with it. I was like, oh, cool, flashing lights and it's so bright and like, this is fun. And then I bought it on DVD the day it came out. I sat down and watched it at home. And I remember when the credits came up, I just sat there and I'm like, this is a piece of crap. This is really bad. It's not good. It's not good. And it wasn't good. And I did enjoy the Snyder Cut. I'm glad it came out. It was super long. It took an entire day to watch it.
It's better to watch that in
all right.
episodes.
Yeah,
exactly. Watch it in parts.
Yeah. But my wife knew like how important it was for me to see the Snyder Cut. So literally I just had the living room to myself the whole day. And I just got through the whole thing, all 4 hours straight through with like minimal bathroom breaks. And I enjoyed Snyder's full vision of it. Again, way too long. And there was just, that kind of like Snyder stuff that's just unnecessary. The women singing about Aquaman on the beach and the whole orchestral slow motion scene that was dragged out with the Flash. Like, beautifully done, cinematically very good, but just I didn't feel was necessary. So I'm like, if it's DC, if it's on TV, like I even watch the CW still. And Jesse and JD give me a hard time about that. But I still watch the CW shows. I lost interest in Legends of Tomorrow. I just couldn't do it. That one lost me. But I watch Batwoman. I watch Stargirl. Yeah, I do. Just because it's it's DC content, and I'm like, all right, I'll check it out. I mean, I don't enjoy a lot of it, but I still watch it.
See, like the thing for me is like I'm a huge fan of the Flash. Like I've read every issue since 1987. I've read a good majority of the Silver Age stuff. So like anything with the Flash in it, I have to watch it. Like even like
Are you still watching the Flash on the CW?
yeah, I still watch it, but I don't watch
Horrible.
any of the other CW. Yeah, it's not good. Like
It's bad. It's not good.
yeah, like there was a little while where like I would kind of, I'd sit down to watch it and I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna have a few beers, just kind of, get a little that was the only way I could watch it, and it was more enjoyable that way because it was like,
oh yeah, it's just silly and stupid. Like
the first two seasons are pretty good, I think, and
great.
then
I really enjoyed those. Yeah,
that's when it kind of starts to slip, and after a while, it felt like I only watch it because I'm such a big fan of the comics that it was like I was given a big critique. It was like I'm like, oh, they're mentioned there. It's a reference to this, that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I don't watch. I mean, I watched Superman and Lois. I thought that was great. Like the first few episodes.
Yeah, I'm trying to get JD and Jesse on board with that. I'm like, it's different. Like it's not. It goes in a very different direction than the other CW shows. They're like, CW, no.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of like, all right, they need to, liquidate all these shows and get some good HBO Max shows because I'm not a big fan of Titans. Like I remember the only episode of Titans that I really liked was like the Jason Todd episode in the first season. That was like the one where
that was good.
This is good. Like I remember watching it. I was like, wow, we're seeing Dick Grayson and Jason Todd on screen. Like that's great. But yeah, I didn't watch. I started the last season, but I kind of just
I wouldn't recommend it. Like, and for me, it was a giant letdown because one of my favorite DC characters, even comic book characters of all time, is the Red Hood. The Batman Under the Red Hood books also were a huge part of my childhood. Like, I loved those books, and then I followed anything Jason Todd was in after that. Like, I even read the whole new 52 countdown to Final Crisis just because he was a character. And I read all 52 issues. It was rough. That was a lot of money too. But yeah, and then like Red Hood and the Outlaws. I stopped reading it, but I did read it when it first came out. But yeah, so they did Red Hood in season 3, which I thought was rushing it a bit. I thought they really needed to. And this isn't even really a spoiler. It's just more of a critique of the character. The Jason Todd character in the show is nowhere near what the Red Hood is in the comics.
Oh no!
Like the Red Hood in the comics is an equal to Batman. Like he kicks Batman's ass in the comics. Like he probably could have killed him, but he just enjoyed taunting him too much. Like what other character that just slices off Batman's mask and holds it in front of him like, ha ha, I got it. The Jason Todd Red Hood, the Red Hood version of Jason Todd in that show is the same whiny kid. Same like says the F word, every other word for shock value, just annoying, and there's badass fight scenes in it where you see the Red Hood like fighting Nightwing, but just visually it's very cool to see Red Hood on the screen fighting Nightwing. But then once he talks, you're like, oh, it's the annoying kid version of Jason Todd, still not the fully grown Jason Todd that could kick Batman's ass. And don't even get me started with how they treat Bruce Wayne in that show. I don't know what they're smoking. I don't know what books they're reading as source material, but that's not Bruce Wayne. That's not Bruce Wayne at all. And it's not just the look. That's a great actor. He was great in Game of Thrones. Right. I really enjoyed him. He's fantastic. But he is given nothing to work with. And the choices he makes as Batman in that show are nothing Batman would ever do or say. So it's just, once that came out. What?
Totally. Like that's what got me. That's why I stopped watching the show. And me and my brother are huge Batman fans. So like we probably talk about Batman almost every day in some shape or form. Like we love Batman. Whenever like we're with together and we're with someone, they mention Batman, we're like, you don't know who you're talking to right now because we're like the Batman, connoisseurs. But yeah, like that was one of the things where I was like, okay, I can't watch this anymore. Like this is not what Batman would do. My brother was like, you need to just stop like being a huge fan and you just need to like lend yourself to it, which I hear a lot of people say that with Titans. You got to just lend yourself to it and forget that you're an expert on these characters.
It's too jarring though. Like, it's
too much. Yeah. But going back to Jason Todd, he's probably my favorite Robin, but I don't read his ongoing. I feel like he's one of my favorite Robins more so because nostalgically, I remember one of the first comics I ever read was Death in the Family. Like, and it wasn't even like it wasn't even like in a graphic novel format. It was like I forget what it was exactly. It might have been like a trading card, or maybe it was a trade, but it was like I was a young kid, and I remember opening it up and couldn't believe that they would kill Robin off. It just felt weird to me. And in that
Yeah.
moment, I remember like specifically like, wow, comics can be really dark. Like it was like so, and Under the Red Hood, that was like, I remember when that came out, that was like the comic for me. For some reason, I was like, whoa, like this. Just going back to like when I first discovered, Jason Todd dying, it was like, whoa, this is like what I kind of wanted. Like,
yeah, it came full circle.
Yeah, it was cool, and I don't know. I've always liked him. I even liked they did a redesign with him recently. I don't know if it was like a couple years ago. Now he doesn't even have
Is that the one with like the hood and like the almost like gas mask thing? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, he has the crowbar. I kind of like that. I mean, like the guns, it's cool, but like something about him using the crowbar was like kind of like, wow, that's like really different. Like, I think it's a good.
I thought that was cool when I saw that. It was a nice touch.
But yeah, more often than not, like those New 52 comics, a lot of the Rebirth comics are just like, like I'll just stick with Death in the Family and Under the Hood.
Yeah, because it's like, what point do you get to where like you've changed the continuity so many times, like certain things don't even matter anymore. Like, like I love like you said, like the Golden Age stuff, and then there's stuff like there's Death of the Family, there's the Killing Joke, even Batman Hush and all those great books. And then you have like the New 52 happen, and it's like, oh, none of that stuff matters anymore. Like, you don't have to read that stuff to understand this. And like I loved the Snyder and Capullo run on Batman. I thought it was some of the best news stories, like, Court of Owls, Endgame, the Death of the Family, like very entertaining reads, great books. But like, it's like, at what point does stuff stop being canon and you're just retelling the same thing over again? Like, I just don't know how many more times you're gonna be able to get away with that, where they reset the timeline every like 2 to 4 years so that they can bring new readers in. You don't have to get all caught up. Then you sacrifice stories that you've been building, like, well, and like how you were talking about with Batman, how like it got to a point where you were like, okay, whatever. Like when I was reading in the New 52, once Commissioner Gordon became Batman, I was like, okay, this is all different. Like, this is crazy. Like, these are very interesting stories, because it's stuff we haven't, like, we've seen other Batman, but this is totally going off in other directions I never expected. And then they ended that whole thing, and it's just like, oh, now Bruce Wayne is Batman and everything's fine. It's like that never happened. Like, wait, what?
Yeah. The thing about, like, people can step into the role as Batman, but like at one point it's going to be, okay, how do we get Bruce Wayne back? And from a Flash fan point of view, it's kind of the same thing with Barry Allen and Wally West. It's like, once you have Wally West back, because right now he's the Flash again, and as a Flash fan, I'm like, man, I kind of miss Barry now. But I went from 2009 to literally last year, where it was like, oh, I'm kind of getting sick of Barry Allen. Like, when can Wally West get back in? It's like, it's got to go back. And with Batman, they I like the Dick Grayson Batman stuff. I don't know if you've read any of that.
Yeah, that was Grant Morrison, I think, too, with the Flamingo and Professor Pig. I really enjoyed those books.
Yeah, like the relationship with the lighthearted Batman and the brooding Robin was such a flip on that dynamic, which was like, wow, this is great, this is different. But even when reading it, it's like, it's not gonna be like this forever. But and we just went on a whole Batman rant. This was great.
Yeah, we did.
Let's talk about the MCU for a little bit.
Okay. That's how it all started. We were talking about that. So with the MCU, like I want to say I was in middle school when those movies first started coming out. Like, the actual MCU, like Iron Man and all that stuff. I think I was in like late junior high. And it was awesome. Again, I'd been a big fan of those characters for years, like watching the animated shows, reading the books. And it was just fun to watch it all build towards what it became. Like, it built towards the Avengers. The Avengers was this groundbreaking movie that brought together all these other characters from all these other movies. It was awesome. And then, we got all the other stuff. But, I've actually just recently been kind of like getting caught up. I watched Black Widow. And, I've been watching all the shows. And I like it. It's entertaining. I do feel though like I'm a bigger fan of what Netflix was doing than what the movies are doing now, because I love Daredevil. The Daredevil show was amazing. To me, that's one of the Marvel's greatest accomplishments.
Totally.
And because it's just perfect. Like that is the comic. It's such a great representation. And Wilson Fisk in that show is just, you can't like, you can hardly compare it. Like, it's one of those performances that's that good. And with I'm a huge Punisher fan, and the John Bernthal Punisher, I was obsessed with it. I loved it. They only had 2 seasons, but those 2 seasons and season 2 of Daredevil are some of my favorite TV, because it's just watching my favorite, superheroes or vigilantes being represented just how I want to see them. So now, I do enjoy Captain America, Iron Man, all those guys, but I'm much more of I like the street level heroes. I can relate to them more. And obviously, probably you could see from Burlap, that's kind of like my whole shtick. I like, there's some grand elements in Burlap of getting into a little supernatural here and there, but mostly it's pretty grounded. And, but with the MCU, I love the big spectacle movies, the sky beams and the aliens and the giant fight scenes. But I'd much rather watch that Daredevil hallway fight scene than the attack on Wakanda in Infinity War.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with MCU. I enjoy it. It's entertainment. I'm watching Hawkeye right now, and I'm enjoying it, but it's not anything grand. I think it's leading towards some really good stuff. But when it comes to the MCU, those big budget movies are crazy. They're fun. They're entertaining. But I'll always lean more towards the Daredevil, Punisher, Netflix side of that universe.
Well, I mean, if the rumors are true, a lot of that's going to be roped into the MCU, which is exciting, but it's kind of scary at the same time, because it's there's no way they're going to be as dark and gritty as they were on Netflix. So I've a lot of people are really excited, because I don't know if you heard the news about Daredevil, but Kevin Feige, he said when Daredevil comes in the MCU, it will be Charlie Cox. We don't know what project or anything, but it's exciting, and I can't wait to see him again. But it's I had, those 3 seasons of Daredevil were probably some of the best TV I've ever seen. Not even from a superhero point of view. That 3rd season was awesome. It was perfect, I thought. And the way it ended was perfect. So I would be okay if they have Daredevil kind of as a supporting character in films. I don't really want them to do a season 4 of Daredevil. I don't, if they do a Daredevil movie, I'm sure it'd be great, but it's it's just not going to be. I don't know. I'd rather have him be a supporting character than have them kind of ruin it.
Oh yeah,
I don't know, for me personally.
And I agree with that, because both him and the Punisher have such a brutal brand of justice, and they talked about John Bernthal would show up as the Punisher again somewhere. There are rumors about that, but it's how do you go from the blood-soaked craziness of the Netflix series and then be Disney Plus presents the Punisher? That'd be kind of a hard pill to swallow. And I mean, Disney has dipped into dark stuff here and there. I was watching Pirates of the Caribbean with my kids the other day. There's some brutal stuff in there. Some kills in there are rough, very bloody. Well, insinuated bloody, but still, people get stabbed through the head, they get their heads hacked off. You don't see a whole lot of it. So there is an exception where Disney could, incorporate some of that violence, but it wouldn't be at all what we know of it.
Right.
So fingers crossed, like you said. It would be great to see Charlie Cox show up. All those rumors about him showing up as Peter's lawyer. That would be perfect. That'd be awesome. And even seeing him show up in something like Moon Knight or something like that, an episode. Hey, quick team up, fight some bad guys. But it's even hard to picture him and Spider-Man have a very close relationship in the comics, and they've even fought a couple times. But to imagine Tom Holland's Spider-Man fighting Charlie Cox's Daredevil, there's no comparison. With the special effects and how powerful they make Tom Holland, for him to go toe to toe with Charlie Cox, who is basically just like a stronger boxer, like martial artist, it doesn't seem very fair. It doesn't seem like that would really work in that universe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, I get what you mean. I recently watched the Amazing Spider-Man movies with my girlfriend, and I had a feeling going into it. I'm like, she's probably gonna like these more than the Tobey Maguire movies, probably more than the Tom Holland, and she did. And I kind of always thought like that second Amazing Spider-Man was really bad. It's not like the best movie ever, but watching it again, I was like, wow, this is a lot better than I thought it was at the time. And I don't know. It's interesting to think at one point they were actually ready to merge that with the MCU, because I think it would have been a very different dynamic than the Tom Holland stuff.
Absolutely.
I actually still wish we got that. Like, I think it would have been. I think, I think Andrew Garfield even said this. Like, his version of Spider-Man wouldn't like Tony Stark, and with the Spider-Man we have in the MCU, he idealizes Iron Man. So it's like that would have been such a cool thing to see. And I think that tone would have been interesting to see adapted even further, because I like Tom Holland. I think it's great. He's young. He's going to really grow into the role. Like, when he's done, it's going to be like, wow, look at this coming of age Spider-Man story we got.
Yeah.
But yeah, real quick, who's your favorite actor in a DC role, and who's your favorite actor in a Marvel role? Who's like the top for either one?
Yeah. Okay, so as far as the MCU goes, I'm gonna say John Bernthal, Punisher, just because like I've been a Punisher fan since like I was a little kid, and I even watched the Dolph Lundgren one from the '90s, the Thomas Jane one, the Ray Stevenson one, and each one of those I enjoyed, but none of them really hit that mark for me that I was watching the Punisher. Ray Stevenson came the closest with Punisher Warzone, but John Bernthal, like he just captured it. Like watching his Punisher is like just if I looked down at like a Punisher Max comic and looked up, I'd be like, yep, that's the dude, that's the voice, that's the mannerism. So yeah, the MCU wise, he is my favorite. And DC, it's tough. Now, are we talking like current DCU or like DC movies throughout all time?
Either one, whatever. Because I know for me personally, Ben Affleck's Batman, that would like when I think of like the animated series, like I think Ben Affleck was the perfect choice for Bruce Wayne.
Yeah,
people have their problems with like his Batman, the killing and just different little things, but I don't know. I really think Ben Affleck was the best Batman.
Yes,
in my opinion.
I agree 100% that he was the best Batman. My brain was going more towards like DC villains, because I love the DC heroes, but to me DC has some of the best villains. Even like the Batman villains, his rogues gallery alone is just super interesting and just such colorful, awesome characters. And even like Superman's got some great ones too, and all that. And then you think about like even Green Arrow and stuff like that. All their villains are very well created. Where I feel like a lot of Marvel villains are kind of like okay, we need a bad guy. This is what a bad guy does. This guy does that. In some regards, right. But and it's probably because I've been binging Peaky Blinders. But I was just thinking about Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow from the Nolan films. He showed up in every one, and in every one it was just like a little treat to see him again.
Oh, totally.
And the opening scene of Dark Knight, and then the courtroom scenes in Dark Knight Rises, which is probably one of my least favorite Batman films, but there are moments in it that I love. And Cillian Murphy's return as the Scarecrow judge was great. So yeah, I loved him in that role. I think he's a very underrated actor. I think, he gets overlooked a lot, but he just killed it. But yeah, I actually agree with you 100% that as far as like accurate, awesome casting, Ben Affleck to me was the living incarnation of like the comic book animated Batman. Killing and all that aside, that was Batman. Yeah, that warehouse scene is that's the gold standard for like a Batman fight scene, in my opinion.
Yeah. But hey, man, this has been great. Honestly, like, how long have we been talking? We've been talking for just about an hour now. So,
Jeez.
this is great. We'll have to
Yeah.
do this again. Have a little
Yeah.
chat, and
Absolutely.
definitely when you do more burlap, I'll definitely be watching it closely, and I'll probably have you on to talk a little more about that.
Yeah.
But thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Hey, you have a good one. And hey, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for having me on.